They say every civilization carries a shadow, a place where its brightest triumphs are reflected in its darkest inventions. In the ancient lands of Sicily, long before Rome rose, long before Alexander swept across continents, there existed a city named a jewel of the Greek world. Merchants spoke of its shining temples, poets praised its vineyards and winds, and philosophers wandered its colonnades seeking truth. But beneath that beauty, beneath the marble and hymns, something older lived. Something cruel, something forged from ambition, fear, and fire, and it would soon awaken in the form of a monstrous creation that sang with the screams of men. A creation the world would one day name the Brazen Bull. A story begins not in the palace of a king, nor on the battlefield of heroes, but in a workshop dim, smoky, and echoing with the rhythmic clang of bronze. Here toiled a master artisan whose hands could bend metal into gods and beasts. He was not a warrior, not a ruler, but in his heart burned a different hunger, the hunger to be remembered. For in that age, kings ruled men, but ruled eternity. Worked day and night shaping something unlike anything he had forged before. A great bronze bull, towering as tall as a warrior and gleaming like a sunlit idol, its body seamless, its horns curved with divine precision. On the outside, it looked like a marvel, a symbol fit for temples, something worthy of Zeus himself. But inside had carved a hollow chamber, tight, inescapable, like a coffin shaped for ritual. Tubes and channels ran through its skull toward the mouth, not unlike the pipes of an ancient flute. This creation was not meant for worship. It was meant for suffering, not merely to inflict it, but to transform it, to turn agony into music. For believed that true immortality could come only from creating something the world had never seen and could never forget. When the bull was complete, stood before it, exhausted, trembling, a man admiring his monster. Sparks danced in the forge around him like spirits celebrating the birth of something terrible. He touched the cold bronze and whispered, "They will know my name." His workshop, once a place of artistry, now felt like a shrine to cruelty. But the one man he sought approval from, the one whose could elevate him beyond mere craftsman, was the Tyrant of. A man whose name carried the weight of storms. His rise to power was whispered like a legend soaked in betrayal. They said he came to with soft words and promises of temples and prosperity. He convinced its citizens to help him build a sanctuary to Zeus atop the cliffs, asking only for trust. And while the people laid stones in piety, laid weapons in secret. On the temple's inauguration day, when hymns filled the air and garlands hung from pillars, he revealed his true nature. His mercenaries seized the armory. His enemies fell before they could even understand the betrayal. By nightfall, had a new ruler, one forged not by divine right, but by cunning and blood. Ruled the city with an iron heart. He believed fear was more loyal than love, that terror lasted longer than gratitude. He introduced punishments not for justice, but for spectacle. He made death into a form of performance, a dark theater where he alone held the script. When presented the bronze bull too, he hoped the tyrant would see genius, and did see genius, but he also saw opportunity. For in the gleam of that monstrous sculpture, he recognized a weapon that could make his reign unforgettable. Unveiled the bull with flourishing pride. He explained that a man placed inside would scream as the fire beneath heated the bronze, and that the tubes, crafted with meticulous precision, would transform those screams into the bellow of a divine beast, turning suffering into symphony. Touch the bronze with quiet curiosity. "A marvel," he murmured, "truly a gift fit for a king." Then he looked at with a smile sharp as a blade. "But tell me, artisan, how can I be certain your invention performs as you claim?" Froze, the air thickened. Suddenly, the beauty of his creation felt like a trap closing around him. "My lord," stammered, "surely you do not suggest?" "I suggest," said calmly, "that you enter your masterpiece, for who better to demonstrate its wonders than the mind who birthed it?" The workshop fell silent, except for the faint crackling of the brazier. One heartbeat later, guards seized. He pleaded, clawed at the ground, shouting that he had meant no harm, that he created the bull for the tyrant's glory, not his own destruction, but only watched, his expression unreadable. Perhaps he admired the irony, perhaps he simply enjoyed the taste of terror. The guards forced into the cramped bronze chamber. The door slammed shut with a metallic finality that echoed like a tomb ceiling. For a moment, the only sound inside was the frantic rasp of his breath. Outside, at his servants. The fire was lit. At first the bull warmed gently, as though waking from slumber. felt the heat beneath him like the touch of a cruel sun. Then, as the flames rose, the bronze began to glow, and the true horror unfolded. Heat wrapped around him like an iron blanket. His skin prickled, then burned. The air inside thickened, scorching his lungs, and when he could bear it no longer, screamed. The pipes transformed his cries into the bellowing of a great beast. Low, resonant, haunting, the Brazen Bull had come alive. And smiled, not with joy, not with admiration, but with the cold satisfaction of a man who sees his power reflected in the suffering of others. He allowed the demonstration to continue until collapsed, his voice withered, his body charred but still alive. When the door was finally opened, the man they pulled out was barely human, looked at him and declared, "Your device is exquisite, but a creator of such cruelty deserves no place in my kingdom." Was dragged to the cliffs and thrown into the abyss. Thus the first victim of the Brazen Bull was its maker. From that moment forward, the bull became the tyrant's instrument, not merely for killing, but for reminding of the price of defiance. The bull was placed in a central plaza, polished to a golden sheen, a monument of terror that glinted under the Sicilian sun. Children grew up fearing its shadow. Merchants whispered warnings when taxation came. Priests trembled when passed. To be condemned to the bull was more than a death sentence. It was a statement, a declaration that the tyrant's will was absolute. The executions became ritualistic, almost religious. Victims were paraded through streets like offerings to a dark god. The fire was fed slowly, deliberately, so that agony would bloom like a twisted flower. On festival days, the bull was lit as music played, merging celebration with torment, weaving cruelty into culture. The screams, altered by the pipes, echoed like the voice of a demon rising from the underworld. But empires built on terror always contain the seeds of their own undoing, for the people could only endure so much. Whispers of rebellion spread like embers in dry grass, and one day those embers ignited. They say that over time, even fear gets tired. At first, when the Brazen Bull roared for the first few victims, all have trembled. People locked their doors, clutched their children's faces to their chests so they wouldn't see, pressed their hands over their ears to muffle the sound. But the bull kept singing. Month after month, year after year, the screams of the condemned, turned into animal bellowing, became part of the city's rhythm. Market days, harvest celebrations, religious festivals, everything could be interrupted by the rising smoke and hollow moan of the metal beast. At first, this made stronger. Then, slowly, it began to do something else. It began to harden the hearts of the people, not in obedience, but in resentment. Under that resentment, something small and dangerous started to grow. Among the citizens there were those who had lost more than comfort. Some had seen brothers dragged toward the bull. Some had watched friends accused of treason because they spoke too freely in wine shops. Some had been forced to stand in the crowd while someone they loved burned unseen inside that hollow monster, only able to track their suffering by the rise and fall of its hideous voice. These people didn't scream, at least not aloud, but their silence was no longer fear, it was calculation. Perched in his palace above the city, disguised that silence as loyalty. He believed that as long as the bull roared and the crowds assembled, his power was secure. He mistook stillness for submission. That was his first mistake. The second was closer to sacrilege. For a long time, he had reserved the bull for enemies and rivals, foreign emissaries who displeased him, wealthy citizens whose property he coveted, philosophers who dared to speak of justice as something larger than a ruler's whim. But cruelty is like fire. Once you begin feeding it, it wants more. Soon, found reasons to condemn almost anyone. A merchant complaining about unfair grain levies, a priest suggesting that the gods preferred mercy, even minor officials who delayed delivering tax records. The Brazen Bull did not ask who was guilty, it asked only for bodies. As the list of victims grew, so did the unease. At first, the people have murmured in their homes behind closed shutters, then those murmurs slipped into the streets. The guards who had once marched with confidence began to notice eyes watching them from doorways, not with terror, but with a cold, measuring gaze. Even the priests in the temples found their prayers harder to say. How could they sing of divine justice when the tyrant's bull drowned out their hymns? One night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, a small group gathered in a storage room near the harbor. A farmer whose son had been condemned for refusing conscription. A widow whose husband had died screaming inside the bull. A young priest, disillusioned with prayers that changed nothing. And a soldier, once sworn to, now unable to bear the stench of burning flesh that clung to his armor. They lit only one lamp, spoke in whispers, and looked at the door every few breaths, expecting it to burst open with armed men. But it didn't. For the first time in many years, words of open rebellion were spoken inside the city. "We cannot live under this beast any longer," the widow said, her voice steady, not shrill. "Every time the bull sings, it takes another piece of us with it." "The guards are too many," the farmer replied. "The palace is fortified. If we rise and fail, we will all feed the bull." "Then we must not fail," the soldier said. "We must strike not only at his walls, but at his belief that we are afraid. The day he realizes we do not fear the bull is the day he falls." So they planned, not a grand, carefully documented conspiracy, but a series of whispered agreements. A look here, a nod there, a basket carried through the marketplace with something hidden beneath the vegetables, a priest who lingered at the temple entrance a little longer than usual, watching which faces turned toward him. The city became a web of quiet signals. The bull, once the centerpiece of the tyrant's control, became a silent rallying point. Every time it bellowed, the anger in the people deepened. Every execution sharpened their resolve. Remained blind. In his mind, the bull was the proof of his genius and the instrument of his immortality. Other rulers possessed armies, walls, ships. He possessed fear itself, cast in metal and fed with human breath. He would sometimes dine within sight of the bull, listening to its monstrous music as if it were a private orchestra. He had long since forgotten the man who built it. Was dust and memory, his name swallowed by the very invention he hoped would make him eternal. Years passed, and the day of the turning came as quietly as sunrise. It was the festival of a local god, a day when the city would normally dress itself in garlands and perfume. The streets should have resounded with flutes and laughter. But this year the air felt. Caravans had brought strange news, revolts in nearby cities, governors overthrown, whispers that tyrants could fall. The people have kept their eyes down and their thoughts hidden, but inside, their blood thrummed with possibility. Ever suspicious, decided that the festival was the perfect opportunity to remind his subjects of his reach. He had ordered a prominent merchant to be executed in the bull, accused of cheating the state in grain deliveries, though everyone knew his true crime had been privately criticizing the tyrant. The announcement was made. The bull would roar at sunset. Crowds gathered as they always had, but something was different. There was less trembling, less weeping, more quiet. The square filled, and yet the noise level remained low, like a storm holding its breath. The guards took their positions. The bull stood gleaming in the light, its hollow body waiting. Appeared on a raised platform to oversee the spectacle, wrapped in expensive robes, adorned with gold. His face was calm, almost bored. For him, this was routine. Another body, another warning, another demonstration that the city belonged to him. He gestured, and the condemned man was dragged forward. The door of the bull was opened. Smoke from previous executions still faintly stained its interior. But before the guards could push the man inside, someone shouted. At first it was just one voice, then another joined, then 10, then 100. The words, carried by desperation and years of pent-up rage, cut through the air like a thrown spear. No more. It wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't a carefully planned slogan. It was just 2 words, but they spread through the crowd like lightning across a darkened sky. No more. Men repeated it. Women joined them. Old voices cracked on the word. Young voices sharpened it. The square, which had once echoed only with the bull's altered bellow, now rose with the raw, human sound of defiance. Stood there stunned. For the first time in his rule, the crowd was not a passive sea of eyes. It was a storm. "Silence them," he ordered, but the guards hesitated. Some shifted uneasily. Others kept their weapons lowered. Among them were men who had buried brothers, friends, and sons. Men who had stood beside the bull one too many times. Men who had been in that dim storage room by the harbor years ago. The soldier who had once whispered rebellion now stood at the front line. His hand gripped his spear, but he did not raise it toward the people. He looked up at the tyrant and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "We are done serving fire." That was the breaking point. The crowd surged, not in panic, but with purpose. Stones flew first, then hands, then stolen swords ripped from hesitant guards. The carefully managed order around the execution site collapsed. Some guards defended the platform out of fear or blind loyalty. Others stepped back, lowering their weapons, seeing in the crowd not enemies, but neighbors, cousins, fellow worshippers who had shared their streets and prayers for years. Tried to shout commands, but his voice was drowned in the roar of the very people he had once silenced with metal and flames. He attempted to retreat toward the palace, but the rebels moved. The path behind him closed. Those who had once feared the bull now moved to surround it, not as a sacred object of terror, but as a tool they could finally turn. "Bring him down," someone shouted. "Let him hear his own music." Two strong men seized the tyrant. The crowd made way, not out of deference, but out of burning expectation. Struggled, cursed, promised rewards, threatened revenge, invoked the gods, claiming divine right. His words bounced off faces that had listened to lies for too long. They dragged him before the Brazen Bull. For the first time saw his device from a new angle, not from a raised seat, comfortably distant, but at ground level, close enough to see the charred stains inside the door, to smell the lingering stench of flesh turned to smoke. He had always seen the bull as an extension of himself, a symbol of his power. Now it loomed like a mirror. "You dare spat, I am your ruler, I am." "No," the widow said, stepping forward from the crowd. Her voice was quiet, but the square fell silent around her, as if the world itself wished to listen. "You were our nightmare, is us, the living. You turned our dead into music. Today we return the song." The door of the bull was opened wide. The metal gleamed, cold and indifferent. The tyrant tried to pull back, but hands held him firm, the same kind of hands that had once been forced to stand obediently and watch his cruelty without protest. They pushed him toward the opening. In that moment's mask cracked. The calm, calculated cruelty, the theatrical confidence fell away. For the first time he felt what every victim had felt, the tight, rising horror of knowing you are about to enter a place from which no voice returns unchanged. He screamed, not with rage, but with pure animal fear. He promised riches. He swore he would dismantle the bull, free the prisoners, rule with kindness. Some in the crowd laughed bitterly. Others looked at him with a strange, almost detached pity not for the man, but for the way power had hollowed him out until he was nothing but a shell filled with arrogance and terror. The soldier who had once served him met his eyes. "Every man stands before the thing he made," he said, "built the bull and died for it. You built this reign of fear, now you pay its price." They forced inside. He struggled awkwardly just as had. The opening was narrow, the interior cramped. He had to bow his head, bend his limbs. Once a lion roaring over the city, he was now just another body folded into bronze. The door slammed shut with the same sound it had made for countless others. This time, however, the people did not look away. The wood was piled beneath the bull. The same hands that had fed the fire to kill innocents now fed it for justice. Sparks caught, flames climbed. The bronze beast began to glow. Inside felt the first lick of heat. For a heartbeat, he clung to the belief that someone would open the door, that this was a cruel meant only to frighten him, not truly kill him. Then the temperature rose. The floor burned his skin. The air thickened. Panic took over. He screamed. The bull answered. Through the pipes and channels, his screams were reshaped, turned into deep, echoing bellows. The sound that had once terrified thousands now rang through with a new meaning. The people listened, not with horror, but with grim recognition. This was the same device, the same sound, but behind it was the one voice that had always been missing from its music, the tyrant's own. The fire burned hotter. The bronze glowed red. Minutes passed. The screams shifted from fury to pleading, from pleading to raw, shapeless sound. The people did not revel in the cruelty the way once had. There was no banquet, no wine raised in ironic toasts. They simply watched, bearing witness that the man who had turned their city into an oven of fear would not escape his own design. When at last the sound faded and the bull fell silent, a strange quiet settled on the square. Through the shimmering heat, it was hard to tell exactly when he died. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the spell had broken. The bronze beast, once a living symbol of terror, now sat mute and dirty in the middle of a city that had finally woken up. When they opened the door, the smell that escaped was thick and choking. Few were able to stand close enough to see what remained of. It was not a man, not a king, not a tyrant, just flesh and ash and ruin. The soldier who had once fed the fires turned away, swallowing bile. The widow stared for a moment, then looked up at the sky as if offering the image to the gods for. "What do we do with it?" someone asked, nodding toward the bull. "Melt it down," one man suggested. "Keep it as a warning," said another. The priest, who had long struggled with prayers drowned out by screams, spoke softly. "Whatever we do, we must remember. Forgetting is how men like him rise again." In some tellings, the people have dragged the bull to the edge of the cliffs and toppled it into the sea, letting the waves cool its cursed metal and bury it in the depths. In others, they melted it and used the bronze to cast bells for temples or weapons for, turning an instrument of torture into something that could either call to worship or protect the city. And in other versions, the bull was sent away as tribute to foreign powers, a physical confession that their city had learned its lesson and no longer wished to carry this monument of cruelty. The truth may be lost, but the story remained. That is its real immortality. What we know is this: the Brazen Bull outlived both its maker and its master in memory, sought eternal fame through invention and found it, but not in the way he hoped. He is remembered not as a genius alone, but as a warning about what happens when brilliance serves cruelty, sought eternal rule through fear, and found his name chained forever to his instrument of torture. To this day, when people speak of tyrants consumed by their own methods, they think of a man roasted alive inside a bronze bull as the people he once terrorized watched in grim silence. There is a deeper lesson inside this story, buried like the hollow space within the bull. The first is that power without restraint eventually turns inward. The same tools used to control others often come back to devour those who wield them. The bull sang for many victims, but its final and truest song was reserved for the tyrant who believed himself above all consequence. The second is that human ingenuity is not inherently good or evil, used his gift for engineering to create something monstrous. Someone else with the same gift might have forged bridges, instruments that healed instead of harmed. The metal was neutral. The fire was neutral. The shape, the intent, the usage, those were human choices. The bull reminds us that the question is not, can we build this, but should we? The third is that fear is powerful, but not infinite. It can silence people for years, bend their spines, alter their voices. But slowly, silently, it also carves channels where anger accumulates. And one day, when that reservoir bursts, even the loudest bull cannot drown it out. In the end, the Brazen Bull is not just a story about ancient cruelty. It is a mirror held up to every age. Every time a leader believes that terror is a stable foundation, every time innovation is twisted toward torment instead of improvement, every time a society becomes numb to suffering and treats it as spectacle, the shadow of that bronze bull stands nearby, waiting, warm with remembered screams. The city have moved on. Children grew up who had only heard stories of the tyrant and his bull. The square where it had once stood became a place for markets and festivals again, filled with music that came from human musicians rather than carefully tuned pipes. Yet older citizens, passing through, would sometimes glance at the stones and remember the fire that once burned there and the day it went out. They did not speak of it constantly. They did not turn it into a hymn of pride. They remembered it the way you remember a wound that finally healed over, a place on the body of the city that still occasionally ached when the weather changed, reminding them where they had been cut and how close they had come to bleeding out entirely. So when you hear the story of the Brazen Bull, it is easy to focus on the horror of the device itself, the metal, the heat, the screaming turned into music. But the real story is not just about a machine. It is about choices. A craftsman who chose ambition over conscience. A ruler who chose terror over mercy. A people who, for a long time, chose silence over risk, and then, one day, chose resistance over fear. And in that final choice, they did what no tyrant can truly prevent. They reclaimed their own voice from the mouth of the bull. The bronze is gone, the fire is ash, but the echo remains, not to glorify cruelty, but to warn against it. Somewhere in the long memory of history, you can still hear two very different sounds: the hollow bellow of the bull when it was used to crush the innocent, and the quiet, steady voices of a people who finally said together, "No more." Between those two sounds, every civilization must choose which one it wants to repeat.